and I started having panic attacks and hyperventilating. Fast forward, and I'm about to go to law school, and I suddenly feel like my throat is closing up and I'm going to throw up like all the time, and nothing would come out when I would succumb to this sensation. I get all sorts of tests done. I undergo an endoscopy under anesthesia, and the answer every single time is, no, you seem perfectly fine. We don't really know what's going on. So for the first time, I'm like, let me explore mental health. I don't know what the hell this means. I was never taught it at all. I can say that because I was a really good student, and I would have gotten an A+ in any class on anxiety. Before I knew it, the sensation just sort of naturally fell away, which was really good news, but then the pandemic hit. I found that mental health, in many ways, is as much an educational journey as it is a developmental one. You can't manage what you don't understand. When all you do is sit there in your own head and criticize yourself all the time, that's not really a fun place to be. But when suddenly you've developed the best friendship ever with yourself, and now you have that all the time, that's incredibly fun.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dear Family, the podcast. In fact, this is episode number 98. I'm so honored and thrilled that you are here with me today. And for my new listeners, thank you for joining. And for my old listeners, thank you for also joining along this journey with me. It means so much. I'm so grateful. I am thrilled to bring you Julian Sarafian today. He is one of those perfect reminders that on the outside, everything can look picture perfect. You can have very supportive parents that aren't pushing you. They're not the tiger parents. They're 100% behind you, whatever you want, whatever you need. You can be in a loving relationship. You can be high achieving and in the best schools, at the best job, and everything looks picture perfect. But what's happening behind closed doors or what's happening within your mind is something totally different, because we know mental illness is an invisible illness. I know you are going to just find so much wisdom with Julian. He just doles it out like you cannot believe, left and right. So I know you're going to learn a lot, and also just be reminded about how stress really affects not just our mental health, but our physical health. So thank you for listening and following me on all the social media platforms. That's Right Now Rachel, right with a W. Please take care of yourself. It's so important to look out for your mental health and for your loved ones' mental health. Get outside, get some of that beautiful vitamin D, listen to the birds, feel the fresh air, taste a delicious peach. Use your senses, connect with the nature, and be present and enjoy yourself. On that note, take care. Julian Sarafian was the valedictorian of his high school and attended UC Berkeley at just 17. He got an internship at the White House at 19, and at 20, he was accepted at NYU Law before transferring to Harvard Law School. His high achievements and California license allowed him to practice law at what he thought was his dream job, something he'd worked his entire life for. But his mental health had other plans. His social anxiety and the intense stress from a high-pressure work environment led to panic attacks and hyperventilating. His mental health also manifested into physical ailments, specifically gastrointestinal issues like gagging. After medical procedures that went nowhere, Julian decided to see if his own mind was worsening his stomach issues. When he threw himself into learning about mental health like it was the most important subject he'd ever studied, his life and his health began to get better. He quit his job and he began to share his journey publicly, doling out great wisdom. For example, becoming your own best friend as opposed to your own worst enemy. Julian's content focuses on the importance of mental health, both in and out of the legal profession, and has gone viral on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitch, where his cumulative following is over 300,000. Currently, Julian is the chief partner of his own law firm, For Creators by Creators PC, with the mission of protecting creators in the digital age. He is co-CEO of the startup Nest Mode, a company on a mission to reinvent shower storage, and his advocacy work has been covered by Bloomberg Law and Newsweek. He's just shared his story in a TEDx, and he's working on a book about his mental health journey. Julian is engaged to his girlfriend, who he credits for pushing him to follow his new dreams. Welcome, Julian. I'm so thrilled to have you. I am one of the last holdouts to go on TikTok, and I was following a few different mental health advocates, and TikTok's algorithm showed me your content. And I reached out to you because I thought you would be such a great person to have on the Dear Family podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me on.
Because this is a podcast called Dear Family, I always love to start by asking my guests to tell us a little bit about themselves and their family.
I love it. We're a small but mighty group. I'm an only child. My parents are both immigrants. Mother's from Vietnam. Father is Armenian descent from France. They met in college at San Francisco State. I came along. We're all from Sacramento, California area. And I have the most loving and supportive parents I could ever imagine, which is one of the reasons I'm actually very passionate about mental health, is because I think people hear my story and they think like, oh, probably had like tiger parents or something, which is just not accurate. So that's the short version of us. And very grateful for
that. Is such an important reminder. And it's funny because I have two teenage daughters and they're also similar to you, high achieving. And I am the opposite of that tiger parent. I'm always like, don't worry about it. Go have fun. Yeah. Make sure you get enough sleep. So thank you for saying that. I am going to read something that your LinkedIn tells the world. In 2012, when you were just 17, you graduated high school as valedictorian and attended UC Berkeley. In 2014, when you were just 19, you got an internship at the White House, which is phenomenal. In 2014, at just 20, you were accepted into NYU Law School. And then you transferred to Harvard Law School in 2016. In 2017, you landed your dream job at a top law firm. And in 2018, when you were just 24, you graduated Harvard Law and you continued to work at a dream firm. The thing about mental illness is it's invisible. Yeah. And it's often the people who on the outside have this kind of picture perfect life that are suffering and we don't know. Tell us what was not on that LinkedIn profile. What did we not see if we were standing outside?
The story goes back to when I was in high school and I was pushing myself really hard to get into the best college possible. And I ended up getting stomach aches. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. So mom and I went to the doctor. The doctor said, oh, it's probably gastritis, stress-induced related stomach acid condition. So just take this medicine, you'll be fine. I'm like, oh, I take the medicine and I'm fine. I'm like, all right, cool. Sounds good. I go to college and I basically didn't really know that I had super bad social anxiety. I kind of thought that everyone else thought the same way I did in terms of like just the level of intrusive thoughts and the self-doubt and the like, oh, I said something wrong. Like, do they hate me or whatever? So it made it very difficult to make friends. And I spent most of my time alone, which was great for getting a good GPA because I studied really hard, but not great for fulfillment in life, so to speak. Things got worse at the end of my college career. My grandmother passed away and she was one of my best friends. I didn't really know how to process the grief. And that is when I started having panic attacks and hyperventilating. Fast forward and I'm about to go to law school and I suddenly feel like my throat is closing up and I'm going to throw up like all the time and nothing would come out when I would succumb to this sensation. I get all sorts of tests done. I undergo an endoscopy under anesthesia. And the answer every single time is, no, you seem perfectly fine. We don't really know what's going on. It would be 5 years of me suffering through that and taking like the strongest antacid medication on the market before I basically get into the same position again where it's debilitating me and I go to a doctor and the doctor says, okay, well, let's maybe do another endoscopy. We're like, let's see. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I know how this road is going to end because I've been down this before. So for the first time, I'm like, let me explore mental health. I don't know what the hell this means. I was never taught it at all. I could say that because I was a really good student and I would have gotten an A+ in any class on anxiety, but alas, wasn't taught. And before I knew it, the sensation just sort of naturally fell away, which was really good news. But then the pandemic hit. And at this point, it's the pandemic. I'm isolated from everybody. I'm trying to be a good role model along with my fiance. She works in the hospital. We're isolating. We haven't seen human beings in months. The anxiety turned into depression. I'm working in Big Law at the time, which is just relentless on mental health and in general, very, very high pressure job. And I end up feeling totally helpless and in some ways hopeless. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do anymore. So I'm going to go to the medical system and just very much say, hello, I have no idea what's going on. Can you help me? And so I did. And they handed me the diagnosis of severe anxiety and mild depression. And since then, the same way that I focus on school, I then immediately was like, okay, I'm going to focus on this. This seems very, very important, more important than all this other crap, to be frank. So therapy, mindfulness courses, meditation, every fundamental of mental you can imagine, I've been practicing since then. I ended up going part-time at my firm and then quitting last July to focus purely on mental health because at this point I just felt it was more important to me. And I was gaining more from my time doing that than from the job making the money. And I'm privileged and in a position of gratitude to be able to do that. I fully acknowledge that. And since then, it's been a whirlwind of a lot of other things career-wise. Mental health advocacy is my main thing, but I'm also an entrepreneur, starting a small business. I opened up a law firm to help content creators.
There's so much that we will dive into for parents that are listening to this with young kids. Often when kids do continually complain of stomach aches, if they've been checked out by an MD, they should definitely consider if it's anxiety related. We also know that there's a huge gut-brain connection, and the gut is actually referred to as the second brain. When you began feeling nauseous and you were gagging uncontrollably, it took over your life. After you accepted that it was stress induced, did things immediately get better, or is it like a process? Or
it was very odd. So my doctor, when I went and I told him, hey, I think I'm going to cancel the second endoscopy because I want to just explore this mental health realm and see if maybe something is there. He told me as I walked out the door, I have patients who have similar issues like this before. And sometimes when they accept that it's being induced by mental health related or something else, just kind of goes away. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's good to know. So I read about how stress can impact the body. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky is a great book. I love what he does. He unpacks this relationship, right? Similar to the gut as a second mind. He talks about how various stressors in our world have basically started misfiring our survival mechanisms, and that can create anxiety and depression, all sorts of things. And once I sort of paired that education with the awareness of, okay, this is a sign that I need to manage my stress better. Let me take a break. Let me step away. Let me at least acknowledge this is not something uncontrollable. This is actually something that I can control by way of managing mental health instead of just being stubborn and stigmatizing mental health, which I think is implicitly what I was doing for a long time. Then the gagging sensation disappeared. There have been very, very few moments since then where I can maybe feel it a little bit. But even then, now I understand why it's coming up. I understand where it stems from. And so I can manage it and swiftly move on. For me, certainly, it was very much a mental block of not managing and paying attention to the right things. And of course, if you're not even acknowledging something that's wrong, how are you going to fix it? You can't.
That's exactly right. What are the tools that you use to manage your anxiety and to decrease your depression?
The fundamentals of mental health cannot understate them enough. Sleeping well, hydrating, cutting people who are draining from your life, surrounding yourself with people who support you and energize you, meditation and mindfulness training in general. For me now, it's more maintenance. I did a lot of the groundwork over the past year and a half by way of unpacking unhelpful thought patterns and rewiring my brain via CBT. I do take mental health medication, which I also find very helpful in clearing the path.
Taking an SSRI?
Yeah, Prozac. That's one of the things that I actually stigmatized for a long time as well. Like, no, I shouldn't take it. It's a fake pill. It doesn't actually help, whatever. And what I told my therapist when I first started training was like, if I really don't see progress in a couple months, then I'll consider doing it. And like 3 months go by without any medication. I'm like, I'm doing everything I can, but oh my God, progress. It's just so slow, man. And I'm impatient as hell. I'm like the most impatient person I ever met. So finally I was like, okay, like I think I could do it without medication. It's just going to take me like 50 times as long. So screw that. I'm going to take medication, see what happens. And oh my God, just so much more helpful. It simply lets me think more clearly. I don't intend on being on it forever. I very much am using it as one tool amongst many to rewire my thinking, because I think a lot of this is just about rewiring the way that you think and your habitual thought patterns. It's a tool. Why not use it? In the same way therapy is, in the same way deep breathing is, in the same way sleeping is. Those are the primary ones. The standard stuff, honestly. It's been more helpful to me because I go into it with a completely open mind. By way of like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm going to completely accept what the system tells me. Of course, it takes a balance to not lose yourself in that process, which is tricky. But I think it's very important to leave that stubbornness behind when you start working on mental health.
I really appreciate you bringing that concept up of like our own destigmatization. You were so hesitant to take Prozac because whatever the stigmatization is that you had in your head, that's part of that self-love and self-compassion and understanding that we need to have it for ourselves too. So thank you for reminding us of that. In 2020, when COVID hit, it majorly spiked your anxiety. I think everyone's, right? We know that there's a major mental health crisis happening with our youth, and you were trying to control everything. Plus, you were living with someone who was working in a hospital. I can only imagine the stress of that on top of it. By the way, congratulations on your engagement. I want to hear more about that in a second. After you went and met with somebody, you realized, you know what, I'm going to reach out and get some help. And you discussed that you received a diagnosis. What happened next?
The diagnosis really showed me how deep I'd fallen, because in the past with the medical system, especially with mental health, we all can tend to be a little bit optimistic with ourselves when we fill out those questionnaires. Like, how often do we worry? Oh, like twice a week. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Probably the ego getting in the way, right? Call it whatever you want. But, this time I filled it out very earnestly. And so when I got the diagnosis, first of all, I was like, okay, this is serious stuff. First of all, it's both anxiety and depression, which is, I've never been that sort of depressed person in general. I'm grateful for that. I tend to have too much energy. Like, that's my thing. So that was certainly jarring. The other thing I want to remind is this is going to be a long path ahead of me. I'm not 18 years old by way of brain habitualization. I have 20 years or whatever of habits that are built here that I'm going to have to now unwind or rewire. So this is going to be a lot of work. And so the first thing I started really figuring out is like, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to tackle this? It's not going to be easy. And I surrounded myself with great people. I'm very grateful for really supportive family and friends. Went to therapy immediately and just started leveraging every resource I could. At the time I was at my law firm, we had access to emotional coaches. So I used them as well, right? I started reading articles on Medium about mental health and ways to conceptualize interpersonal development and emotional development, just basically understand and educate myself as much as I could. I found that mental health in many ways is as much an educational journey as it is a developmental one. You can't manage what you don't understand. It's as simple as that. And we don't teach any of this at all, ever, which is a huge problem. And something that I'm very much trying to combat against and advocate for is education in this space. So for me, it looked like a lot of education and a lot of practice, just day in and day out of like, okay, let me try this again. Okay, I'm going to mess up, whatever. I'm going to try it again and try it again and try it again. And like learning those things like patience with myself were very essential and important in that path.
Oh, I'm so glad that you are speaking out as an advocate, because high school kids, middle school kids could really connect to you and understand, here's someone that looks like me, a high achieving person that really suffered by not focusing and paying attention to all those warning signs. So learn the warning signs earlier.
That's my hope. Well, at least warn them.
After you got your diagnosis and you started all of these therapies and learning and understanding it was going to take time to rewire your brain and finding some patience within yourself, you did in 2021 have some fleeting suicidal ideation and some thoughts of self-harm. Did that make you doubt your path? And if so, what did you do?
So it was surprising to me because I'd already started treatment for about 2 months. Things were going well. Everything was looking in the right direction. And suddenly those thoughts hit me and I'm like, what is going on? Because my understanding, the sort of idea is when you bottom out, that's when everything's the worst. Then when you get better, things are better. I knew that I was on the right track. I knew that I wasn't doing anything wrong. What it showed me beyond the fact that it's unpredictable, that's one thing, obviously, is you can have damage that you only start feeling and understanding after you begin the process of healing and developing. And I've noticed this actually multiple times in my journey since then, where my mental state isn't actually the worst, or the sort of intrusive thoughts are not the worst when I'm like the most miserable, but it's when I start actually leveling and grounding myself that things start hitting me. Sort of like letting something seep out slowly as opposed to letting it all out at once. I think that's the best analogy I can use for it. I didn't really doubt the path I was on simply because every single day that went by, I was still happier. I was still more grounded. I was still feeling more like myself. And so even if that did hit me, I didn't doubt the bigger picture, but it was certainly a surprise. And it was a warning sign, again, for everyone in the mental health space that this stuff is not simple and it's very unpredictable. And that's just how it goes. And you have to roll with the punches.
It's not one and done. It's a lifelong battle, lifelong journey, lifelong education. When you began managing your anxiety through therapy and medication and meditation, you began to feel self-love for the first time. Tell us what that felt like after a lifetime of being, I'm guessing, critical of yourself.
I think that we can very easily become our own inner critic and our worst critic all the time. And I'm definitely a perfectionist. And that goes hand in hand with being a perfectionist, is tearing yourself down all the time over every little thing. It was months after training. I felt like I had built up another narrative in my head of not my inner critic, but a best friend of my own. Every time that I would start beating myself up, would step in and be like, no, let's not do that, because that's not being my own best friend. In some ways, my own worst enemy, right? And there was just one moment where I basically felt very alone. And without even a second thought, this other narrative that I'd created in my head told me, you're never alone, right? Like I'll be here. And call it spirituality, call it being in touch with yourself, call it self-love. Like, I don't really care what you call it. But for me, it was very, very empowering, because when all you do is sit there in your own head and criticize yourself all the time, that's not really a fun place to be. But when suddenly you've developed the best friendship ever with yourself, and now you have that all the time, that's incredibly fun. And it wasn't something that I had for a long time.
I really love that, becoming your own best friend.
Yeah.
That is such a great concept, especially to teach to kids. That's really great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
So what's the power in speaking up about your struggles or admitting you don't have all the answers?
I look back on my journey, and I've always tried to do what everyone said is correct or optimal. I listened to my parents and society and the school system, and I consolidated all of that. And I said, okay, balancing everything, this is the optimal path. And no one ever stepped in and was like, hey, dude, that's not optimal. Or like, maybe you should do that and that's fine, but work on this as well. And it speaks to me of a system that is just broken, plain and simple. The deeper you look into the world of mental health and the statistics and the lack of education and the lack of resources, all of it, the more you realize that it's a completely broken system right now. It's inundated, it's under-resourced, it's understaffed. And of course, the stigma locks conversations in place. I'm not even talking about the negative side and the toxic side where people are ripping apart people with mental health conditions and whatnot. Like, I'm leaving that aside. Just on its own right, the conversations aren't happening. And so for me, I want to show everybody in some ways that the system is to blame here and that we need to fix it and change it. And my story is emblematic of the change that needs to happen. Because like I mentioned earlier in the show, this is something I really push. I would have gotten 110% in a class that was mental health conditions and anxiety, understanding them, right? Like, let's learn the signs of them. Let's understand how to manage them. I'm a good student. I know I am. Look at my resume if you don't agree with me, right? I put that all aside. I would have done well in that. I would have learned it, but we don't learn about those things. And because we don't learn about those things and don't have these conversations, a lot of kids like myself, both older than me, but also younger than me, fall into the same trap of work all the time. And mental health, maybe you see something on Instagram like once a month about it now. I'm glad, by the way, that there's a lot of resources out there now on social media for folks to learn about these things. There were not as much when I was younger. But certainly for me, I just think it's an important message that people need to hear, especially right now, the pandemic that has shaken everything up.
It's really true. I volunteer for NAMI. I go into middle schools and high schools and teach warning signs. And it's a program called Ending the Silence because we want to get kids to be able to talk about it. I also sometimes meet with parents, and I explain to the parents, like, it's okay for your kids to not be constantly performing. It's okay for them to be bored. It's okay for us as adults to be bored. We need to let ourselves do nothing. Actually, those are the times that we're often the most creative, and it's a reset. Our culture is just such a fast pace with our smartphones and access. Our bodies are constantly in that fight or flight mode. Yeah. And especially for somebody like you, who's so high achieving and was so programmed to work so hard. I appreciate you bringing up the social anxiety. I see that with some high achieving kids, why they become perfectionists. All the things you're talking about are so important. In July 2021, you quit your corporate attorney job to focus on your mental health, which I'm sure must have been an agonizing decision, or maybe it wasn't. You'll tell us. But I'm sure you never would have expected to have worked that hard to then just quit. Tell us about that decision. And I want to also hear about what you're working on now.
My fiance, she's always 10 steps ahead of me. She once asked me years before the pandemic, so when are you going to quit your job? Because, it seems like it's not really a thing for you. And I was like, no, it's fine. I like it. I'll do it. So first credit to her for, of course, calling me out years before me and helping me through the process. But it was certainly a process. It was about 6 months of ideating to actually acting. The thoughts came, I was like, oh, maybe I'll actually leave and go in-house, do a different job, not in big law, just a different side of the industry. And then I applied to a couple of jobs. The market is super duper competitive because during the pandemic, a lot of attorneys are trying to leave big law and go in-house. So I'm competing with people who are way more qualified than me. I would have not hired me over them. I would have hired the other people straight up. So those didn't pan out. And I'm sitting there and it's April of 2021. And I just realized after months and months of thinking, what am I going to do? I just feel trapped. I don't feel like there's any solution here, that the only one trapping myself here is me. And if the worst thing that's going to happen is I take a gap year to focus on mental health, that's worth it to me. I've certainly bought myself enough time by graduating a year early from undergrad and going straight through to warrant it. And so eventually I made the decision. Since that one moment, I never really questioned it because, again, for me, it's a calculus at the end of the day. It's a transaction, right? The job takes time and energy. It gives me at the time money and some skills and the resume boost. What can't I do? Well, I can't really explore my interests. I can't really use my voice. I can't really manage my mental health and improve it. All of those factors came into play. And once I made the decision, that was that. Now, when I quit, I had no idea what I was going to do next at all. Like literally other than focus on mental health. That was my plan. Just train that. 3 days later, I post that story on LinkedIn that you read some of just now. And I really had no intention of anything by putting that out there. Honestly, I was like, this happened to me. So here, if it helps someone, great. Literally just put it on the internet and it blows up. It goes viral. I get a lot of people who now follow me on LinkedIn. And I'm like, okay, there's a lot of people who need this now is the first thing that showed me. So I immediately turned to writing and advocating for mental health however I could. I started writing, publishing articles on Medium and LinkedIn. I didn't find the growth that I really wanted. So then I pivoted and went to Instagram. Again, didn't really find a ton of organic reach there. So then I went to TikTok. A good friend of mine's like, hey, you should go on TikTok, man. That's where everything is. I'm like, okay, I'm not a 17-year-old dancing, but let's do this thing. Let's go. And I never really looked back. My first video was about 3 signs of anxiety or something, like some trend. I cringed the whole time filming it, but I was like, I'm going to do it. Whatever it takes to reach people and get this message. Like I will cringe a billion times if that's what it takes. And I've not looked back. Since then we built a community on TikTok of over 300,000. We're on Instagram almost at 10,000 now. I opened up a Discord community where people can talk about mental compassion and just help each other share resources. We're at like 2,200. And I live stream every now and then on Twitch as well, where I just talk to folks directly about mental health and we open up a space to talk. I had a TEDx speech where I talked about my mental health story as well. That was an honor to give that. Beyond that, though, there's other things I'm working on too. There's been a project for about 1.5 years I've been working on with some friends called Nest Mode, and we want to reinvent shower storage. I'm the CEO of that company, and we're launching on Kickstarter right now. It's May 2022, so I don't know when you were listening to this, but June 2022 is when we're launching. And I just recently opened up my own law firm to represent content creators because I found that myself as a content creator, this is a Wild West, and creators are getting basically abused, like a lot, in a lot of different ways by the platforms, by predatory brands, by bad actors, by all sorts of folks. And I don't like it. So I want to go out there and be part of that realm to help protect creators. And so that's another avenue of law that I've re-entered. I didn't know if I would practice law after I quit, to be honest with you, but here I am again. So.
I am so happy for you that you listened to your intuition and knew to take care of your mental health, because look at what you're doing now. I'm sure you're filling yourself up with helping others. There's nothing like that. I will have links in the show notes to all of your references. Clearly, you're a true mental health advocate and you're walking the walk. Why do you want people to know that mental health is real, even if they don't understand it? And what would you tell somebody that's struggling or suffering that also maybe doesn't want to admit that they have a mental health disorder or mental illness or whatever you want to call it?
For the first question, I think it's important for people to understand, if nothing else, the perspective in my story, because you cannot manage something that you don't acknowledge. And mental health, like we discussed earlier in the show, it's certainly invisible. It's certainly stigmatized. And because of all of that, people don't even think of it as an option. And for a large part of my 20s with this sort of gagging issue, that was me. I was like, it doesn't even enter the realm of possibilities. So how am I supposed to actually acknowledge it if I'm not even aware of it? You don't know what you don't know. And there are things you don't know that you don't know. And that's kind of the realm of mental health. And so that's the reason I really want people to pay attention and accept that you may not understand something, because the first step to learning is acknowledging that I don't understand it. But right now, we're not even doing that. We're just ignoring it entirely, which is much worse. Now, to the second piece of helping somebody who might be struggling and doesn't know where to start, or maybe they're, I don't want to say stubborn, but it's tough to overcome that stigma and accept that you're going to have this label, someone with anxiety, someone with depression, whatever. I would challenge them to think this way. You know where the current line of thinking has gotten you. You know where the current line of acting and habits and all of that collectively has gotten you. It's to where you are now. If you're feeling great, then awesome. You're probably not struggling and not part of the population that we're questioning here. But if you're not fulfilled, if you're not thrilled, then I challenge you to think about taking a different path for a little while and see where that leads. Because ultimately, you can always go back to where you are now. You can shed all of this mental health mumbo jumbo, go back to exactly what you're doing right now in a month and 2 months. Nothing's going to stop you from doing that. But if you know where this path leads and this path leads to misery, then why not try something else and see where that leads instead? Certainly, I can't tell you that the stigma won't be there and friends will understand or anything like that, but I don't frankly care. what your friends think or what the world says. None of that matters to me. What matters to me is how fulfilled you are. And ultimately, no one's going to be able to change that position except you. And that's aside from any sort of levels of names or labels or any of that crap. So what I would say is challenge yourself to think a little bit differently and try it out.
The statistic of 1 in 4 will deal with a mental health issue in their lifetime. I honestly think it's 4 in 4. I think mental health is health. Just like we have physical health and we're going to have physical ailments, we're going to have mental ailments. You mentioned your TEDx, which was fantastic. I was very moved by it. And you just did it recently, March 2022. And you talk about the cost of success. And you discuss how in the fame and the glory and the pedigree, which was basically what you were on this road towards and achieving, that narrative of success, there are some notions that are missing, namely misery and despair and isolation. How should we redefine success?
No matter how we try to redefine it, I think it's naive to sort of say, oh, success isn't getting into Harvard. Success is actually just being healthy and happy. We can say that a billion times, but in our world that is naturally competitive, and not just in the US, but everywhere globally, I don't think that's going to happen. What is success is the question. First of all, it's what you make of it, and it's what you decide. I would argue that I'm more successful now than I was in my job, in part because I quit, in part because of what I'm doing, in part because developmentally that was the right thing for me to do. So screw what everybody says about the definition. It's whatever makes you fulfilled and happy, right? That's the basic definition. But at a deeper level, I think that what's more important than conceptualizing success, because everyone, no matter how hard we try to run away from the natural conceptions of success, we're probably not going to be able to. I think it takes a very, very, very free thinker to really cast aside all sort of competitive notions of success entirely and live that. It's not something that I've seen done successfully, to be frank. I think instead we should just challenge ourselves to take care of our mental health while on route to chasing whatever it is that we are chasing, be it success or not, because I don't think any kids are going to listen to us and take us seriously if we tell them, don't chase the Harvards and the best money. The world is so biased in that direction. It's not going to go anywhere. So I think it's smarter to reason through it and say, okay, like maybe that is success, or maybe that's what you think success is. And that's fine. But understand that there's a cost to working this hard, and understand that there's a cost to that perspective, and understand that you can manage it while you are working through it.
That's right. And as you're on that road to heading towards your success, understand how important relationships are and connections and becoming your own best friend. I love that so much. It reminds me of my husband and I went to Bali for our honeymoon, and we went into these little villages and we saw families living in a house with multi-generations, dirt floors. They had very little and they were so happy. And so what is success? They probably could tell it better than we can. Thank you for that reminder that it really is what you make of it. You're a lawyer for creators. Tell us some of the people that you're representing. That's very cool.
We have a couple folks because we're just getting off the ground. We have Seb Spice Show, which is on TikTok. He's an Australian TikToker. We have Feed Me Mare. She's a food blogger, does a lot of stuff about Asian cuisine on Instagram and YouTube. And we're in the process of signing another client right now, which I cannot name because we haven't signed them officially, but a medical doctor, a TikToker, and an influencer. So we're really excited. It's a really fun space to be in. Creators, I think, are some of the coolest people ever. And honestly, I think creators have some of the best and the highest levels of courage out of everybody else, especially putting their face out there in the internet as it is today, which is just a cesspool of toxicity, to be frank, because there's just no accountability, to be honest. It's kind of a joke. As a lawyer, I could say that it's a joke, but in any event, it's a fun space to be in. And we're happy to be in it. And there's a lot of unique problems creators are facing. I was just watching a video earlier of a TikTok of some girl who had her Instagram account basically deactivated by Instagram. And then some sort of predatory company said, oh, we'll give it back to you for $30,000. There's layers to the complexities of fraud happening right now to creators that no one's really paying attention to. And that's really what I'm seeking to do here with our firm is weaponize and give creators some of the tools to fight back and fight for themselves because they deserve it. I know what it's like firsthand to be a creator and how difficult that is.
You're going to be busy with that. Well, good. We need that. We really do. You're definitely filling a big hole. And you're a content creator, so you understand firsthand. Here are my last two questions that I ask all of my guests. Normally I ask if you could write your younger 20-year-old self a love letter, but I'm thinking because you're still relatively young, let's say 18, okay?
Sure.
So if you could write your younger 18-year-old self a Dear Julian love letter, knowing what you know now, what would it say?
I've thought about this a lot. I would basically yell and scream at them to learn about mental health and educate themselves in every single way I could. Julian, listen, man, you grind, you keep doing you, all that's fine. But dude, you need to learn about mental health. Like you need to literally just the baseline educate yourself on it because you don't know what you don't know. And it's going to inflict a lot of damage on you and your life if you don't understand it and take it seriously. And I can say that as the older version of you who's gone through it. That would be my one attempt at getting through the very stubborn mind of my 18-year-old self. It would probably fall on deaf ears, but maybe not.
At 18, you were already a valedictorian. It's interesting. You can be really wise in some areas and not so wise in others. Last question, Julian. What brings you happiness? What are some happiness habits that you have?
I think that writing helps clear up your ways of thinking, and it works the imagination muscle that a lot of us now have crippled because we consume and consume and consume and we don't create. And don't get me wrong, like video creating, like TikTok and Instagram and whatnot, like that's one level, but I think writing is the deepest level of putting your identity on paper and putting your identity out into the world. There's something special about writing, even if it's just a short story that's fictional. No one will ever see it. It's in your Google Drive, hidden with a password. I think there's value in that. I find that when I disappear into my pages of just writing my book or writing an article, those are the moments when I'm really at peace.
Well, you didn't tell me you're writing a book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, project number 842. I am writing a book. It's a narrative on my own mental health experiences and sort of a broader discussion of where we are mental health wise in the world. It needs a lot of work. I'm trying to give it more attention now, but it's been a lot to balance with everything else going on. I'm most likely going to self-publish it, to be frank, because I think that publishing companies are ripping off creators, aka authors. I'm looking to get that done, hopefully either late this year or early next, but I'm not going to rush it. It has to be right.
Well, I'm looking forward to Nest Mode. I'll have to check that out when it comes out in a month. This has been so enlightening. I'm really grateful to have had this time with you. Proud of you. You are a shining example of somebody that listened to their gut and it's paying off, and how important it is to take care of your mental health first.
I agree. Thanks, Rachel. I very much appreciate that.
It's so lovely meeting you.
Yeah, you too.
Take care.
Cool.
Okay, bye.
Yeah.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.